Well, as the United States continues to unravel at home, offshores abroad, um, America's bipartisan foreign policy consensus marches on, as if nothing's going on here. America, while it may look like the U.S. is coming apart at the seams, its government is still trying to impose its will across the globe, and is still actively playing a role in international politics, trying to be the world superpower. I think this is something that most Americans, well, actually something that I know most Americans don't think about. They don't really realize the role that the U.S. plays in the world, and it really shows how much, I guess, that the establishment in Washington is unconcerned with what's going on here at home, with all of the unrest, that they would continue to try and go out and act like, we really need to take care of China because that's a big threat to the continued existence of the United States, rather than, correctly assessing that the discontent of its own citizens is the real threat to the continued existence of the United States. No, this new Cold War with China that has been pushed by Trump and by Pompeo, and by other people before Trump was elected. This whole narrative is continuing to gain steam, and in that spirit of the Cold War, we now are hearing that the U.S. wants to create a new organization in East Asia, similar to NATO. Now, they tried to do this back in the Vietnam era with SEATO, the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, and that did not last long, but this is going to be even bigger than SEATO. This is going to span, all of the Pacific, and well, more than the Pacific, because it would include the Indian Ocean as well, because the people who the U.S. wants to try and build this alliance with, it's the Australians, the Japanese, and the Indians. The U.S. hopes to build some kind of anti-China alliance, an alliance which would kind of encircle China. India, I think, is probably the most notable member of this proposed group, because India does have the second largest population on Earth after China, and they do share a very long border with China, with which they've clashed with, quite a few times recently. And so it would be very significant if India, also a nuclear power, was to join this anti-China alliance, because the risk that there would be some kind of major conflict involving the United States and China, I think, would be significantly higher if the U.S. was bound by treaty to defend India, a country which, is right next to China. From a security standpoint, to me, it would be like if we moved China right up next to our border. It would give the Chinese a way to draw the U.S. into a war, which, is something that, if I were the President of the United States or the Secretary of State, I would be trying to make it as hard for the U.S. to get involved in wars as possible, especially with another nuclear state like China. You can't just have a war with, a country like China, because, that doesn't end well. They have nukes, we have nukes. It's a lose-lose situation. That's not something that can even be considered. If you want to talk about, any sort of foreign policy towards a nuclear power, it can't really be an aggressive one. And you want to do everything you can, if they seem somewhat aggressive towards you, to try and talk them down from the ledge. Because no nuclear powers on Earth have any interest in engaging in conflict with one another. Now, another major risk of this whole alliance is that if it's structured like NATO, NATO was set up to counter the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union, as we know, hasn't existed now for nearly 30 years, yet NATO still endures. And that is because the NATO treaty doesn't specify that this treaty is just to bound these countries who are members to an alliance against the Soviet Union. It's against any other country. So if any of these countries are attacked by any, country in the world, all the members of NATO are supposed to go defend that country. Well, if you have a similar organization with India, Japan, and Australia as members, well, if, let's say, Pakistan attacked India, India could then invoke this treaty to get the U.S. in to fight a war on their behalf against Pakistan, another nuclear power. And if that were to happen, then it would be almost certain that China would join in to defend Pakistan, considering that Pakistan is a relatively decent ally of China, and that China, I don't think, wants to see Pakistan vanquished by the Indians and the Americans. And so it's possible that the U.S. could get sucked into a war with China without China even, really doing anything. At least not directly. It would be the result of what Pakistan did. Even though you could say, well, if China doesn't want to get involved, they shouldn't be defending Pakistan. And maybe you could argue the Chinese would make the calculus that it's not worth going in to defend Pakistan if Pakistan gets itself into a war with the U.S. and India. But frankly, I'm not willing to just take that bet. To me, that's way too risky. I'm not comfortable having, even NATO, just plain old NATO, where it's all the European countries bound, to the U.S., that the U.S. must defend if they're ever attacked, even though I don't think that these days Russia is a big threat to most of these countries, and I don't think Russia's about to invade Germany or Poland. But I sure as hell am not comfortable with a NATO-like organization in Asia that is meant to counter China. And I'm sure there are plenty of other security threats that aren't China or Pakistan that I'm not thinking of either. And so conferences are supposed to be beginning this fall in Delhi, or was it New Delhi? I can't remember which. It might have just been plain old Delhi in India, between these four states, the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India. And I hope nothing comes out of them. But the fact that this is being officially announced by the U.S. State Department, and that they are going to hold the conferences, I would have to think that it wouldn't get this far if there wasn't a decent chance of them coming to some kind of an agreement. So obviously nothing's been negotiated, let alone signed as of yet, but I am, for the time being, going to be incredibly nervous, because if the U.S. does somehow make it out of this social unrest that it's experiencing right now, and gets back on the road towards stabilizing itself domestically, well, then what would be a worse way of disrupting that than by getting it involved into another encumbering alliance in a whole other part of the world, now no longer Western Europe, but now East Asia, and then getting sucked into a war with China, a nuclear power. It really does feel like our leaders, if they don't want us all dead, they at least want us to suffer. It almost amazes me that America's lasted as long as it has so far. With patriots like Mike Pompeo around, who needs traitors? So, with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So, I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.